Throughout history, socialism has often captivated people with its promise of a fairer society. The idea of redistributing wealth and having the state ensure everyone gets a fair shot can sound incredibly appealing, especially in times of inequality or economic hardship. Many are drawn to the vision of a community where resources are shared and no one is left behind. This allure isn't just theoretical. It has inspired movements, debates, and even revolutions across the globe. But what is it about socialism that continues to spark curiosity and hope in so many minds? Socialist thought has deep roots, tracing back to the ideas of Karl Marx in the 19th century. Marx envisioned a society where resources and power were shared equally, aiming to eliminate class divisions. Leaders like Lenin in Russia, Castro in Cuba, and Chavez in Venezuela took these ideas and adapted them to their own countries, each believing they had discovered the key to a fairer world. Their revolutionary movements promised justice and equality, inspiring millions but also sparking intense debates about the best path to social progress. Socialism often resonates with people because it highlights real issues found in many capitalist societies, like income inequality and lack of access to basic services. These problems can make daily life challenging for many, fueling a sense of injustice. At its core, socialism taps into our natural desire for fairness and equal opportunity. By promising to address these genuine concerns, such as poverty and social exclusion, socialism can sound like a compelling solution to those who feel left behind. This appeal is rooted in the hope for a society where everyone has a fair shot and no one is left out. One of the biggest challenges faced by socialist economies is known as the calculation problem. This issue arises because, without market prices set by supply and demand, it's incredibly difficult for central planners to figure out exactly what to produce, in what quantities, and where resources should go. Even with the best intentions, this lack of clear information can lead to shortages, surpluses, and inefficiencies. As a result, the admirable goals of equality and shared prosperity can be undermined by practical difficulties in organizing production and distribution. It's a classic example of how good intentions sometimes run into tough real-world obstacles. Ludwig von Mises, an influential economist, raised a key question about how socialist economies make decisions. In market economies, prices help signal what goods are in demand and how resources should be allocated. But in a socialist system, where the government controls production, these price signals are missing. This creates what's known as the calculation problem. Without real prices, it's much harder to figure out what to produce and in what quantities. As a result, these economies often face challenges like shortages or surpluses, simply because they lack the information that prices naturally provide. Prices play a central role in market economies by acting as signals that guide the decisions of buyers and sellers. When prices rise, it often means a good is in high demand or short supply, encouraging producers to make more and consumers to use less. Conversely, falling prices signal abundance or lower demand, prompting adjustments in production and consumption. Through this system, millions of individual choices come together, allowing resources to be allocated where they're most needed without any central planner. It's a bit like an invisible hand, quietly coordinating the actions of everyone in the market. In a socialist system with central planning, the government makes most economic decisions instead of relying on markets. This means that prices, which usually reflect supply and demand, are often set by officials rather than emerging naturally. Without these price signals, it's much harder to know what goods are needed, in what quantities, or where resources should go. As a result, planners can struggle to allocate resources efficiently, leading to shortages or surpluses. This challenge is a key reason why critics argue that central planning makes effective economic calculation nearly impossible. Friedrich Hayek argued that economic knowledge is spread out among millions of individuals, each with their own unique insights and experiences. This means that no single person or central authority can ever gather all the information needed to make perfect decisions for everyone. Instead, markets allow people to use their local knowledge in real time, adjusting to changes and sharing information through prices. Hayek believed that this decentralized process is much more efficient than any attempt at central planning. In short, he saw the spontaneous order of markets as the best way to coordinate complex economies. Market mechanisms rely on countless individual decisions to set prices and allocate resources efficiently. In contrast, socialism often replaces this spontaneous coordination with centralized planning, where officials attempt to predict and direct economic needs. This approach can lead to inefficiencies, as planners may lack the detailed, real-time information that markets naturally provide. As a result, resources might be misallocated, leading to shortages or surpluses. The difference highlights how decentralized choices can sometimes outperform top-down management when it comes to organizing an economy. One of the main criticisms of socialist planning is the frequent occurrence of shortages and surpluses. Centralized decision-making can make it difficult to accurately predict what people actually need or want. As a result, factories might produce too much of one product that sits unused, while essential goods are nowhere to be found. This mismatch between supply and demand can lead to frustration for consumers and inefficiencies in the economy. It's a challenge that has sparked many debates about how best to organize production and distribution. The Soviet Union embarked on what many consider the largest economic experiment in history. With its ambitious central planning, the government took control of nearly every aspect of production and distribution, aiming to create a society where resources were shared equally. This meant setting targets for factories, farms, and even entire regions, all from a central authority in Moscow. While the system led to impressive achievements like rapid industrialization, it also faced significant challenges, including inefficiencies and shortages. The legacy of this grand experiment continues to shape discussions about economics and society today. On paper, the Soviet Union often boasted impressive GDP growth rates, which seemed to signal a thriving economy. However, these numbers were not always as reliable as they appeared. The methods used to calculate economic output frequently overlooked inefficiencies, shortages, and the actual quality of goods produced. As a result, the official statistics painted an overly optimistic picture, masking deeper issues within the system. This disconnect between reported growth and real economic health became a significant challenge for both Soviet leaders and outside observers trying to understand the true state of the economy. The Soviet nail story is often cited as a perfect illustration of the strange results that can come from central planning. In the Soviet Union, factories were given strict production targets, like making a certain number of nails or reaching a specific weight. To meet these quotas, some factories produced huge, impractical nails, while others churned out tiny ones by the millions, neither of which were actually useful. This story highlights how focusing only on numbers can lead to outcomes that miss the real needs of people. It's a reminder that sometimes, following the rules too closely can create more problems than it solves. Systemic dysfunction occurs when inefficiencies in one part of a system ripple outward, affecting entire industries. Over time, these small problems can multiply, creating widespread shortages and long waiting lines for goods and services. For example, if supply chains are slow or poorly managed, stores may run out of essential products, leaving customers frustrated. This pattern can be seen in various sectors, from healthcare to transportation, where delays and bottlenecks become the norm. Ultimately, these chronic issues highlight the importance of addressing root causes rather than just treating the symptoms. In socialist economies, the drive to innovate can sometimes fade because individual rewards for exceptional performance are often limited. When everyone receives similar benefits regardless of their effort or creativity, the motivation to go above and beyond tends to diminish. This can lead to a sense of stagnation, where new ideas and improvements are less likely to emerge. Over time, the lack of strong incentives may slow progress and make it harder for these economies to keep up with rapidly changing global markets. The end of the Soviet Union is often imagined as a dramatic showdown, but in reality, it was economic exhaustion that brought the superpower to its knees. Decades of centralized planning led to stagnation, shortages, and a lack of innovation. While the arms race with the West put immense pressure on the Soviet economy, it wasn't a military defeat that caused the collapse. Instead, it was the inability to keep up with the demands of its own people and the global economy. As living standards fell and reforms failed, the system simply unraveled from within. Venezuela was once considered one of the wealthiest countries in South America, thanks to its vast oil reserves and booming economy. However, Over the past 2 decades, a series of socialist policies dramatically changed the nation's trajectory. Nationalization of industries, strict price controls, and heavy government spending initially aimed to reduce inequality, but instead led to economic mismanagement and widespread shortages. Hyperinflation and a collapse in public services soon followed, pushing millions of Venezuelans to leave the country in search of better opportunities. This rapid decline highlights how policy decisions can have profound and lasting impacts on a nation's prosperity. Hugo Chávez's time in power was marked by sweeping reforms that changed Venezuela's economic landscape. He nationalized key industries like oil, telecommunications, and electricity, aiming to give the state more control over the country's wealth. Price controls were introduced on basic goods to make them more affordable. But these measures often led to shortages and black markets. For a while, high oil revenues masked deeper economic problems, creating an illusion of prosperity. However, when oil prices dropped, the vulnerabilities of this model became increasingly apparent. In Venezuela, price controls and heavy state intervention were introduced with the aim of making basic goods more affordable for everyone. However, these measures often backfired. By setting prices below the cost of production, many businesses couldn't sustain their operations, leading to widespread shortages of essential items like food and medicine. Over time, this created a cycle where scarcity fueled inflation and the economy struggled to recover. The Venezuelan experience highlights how well-intentioned policies can sometimes have unintended and far-reaching consequences. In the aftermath of Venezuela's economic collapse, hyperinflation has made everyday essentials nearly impossible to afford for many families. Prices for food, medicine, and basic goods have soared, leaving shelves empty and wallets stretched thin. This economic turmoil has forced millions of Venezuelans to leave their homes in search of better opportunities abroad, creating one of the largest mass migrations in recent history. The resulting humanitarian crisis has put immense pressure on neighboring countries and international aid organizations as they work to support those displaced by the ongoing challenges in Venezuela. Cuba has stood out for decades as the world's longest-running socialist economy, shaped by policies introduced after the 1959 revolution. Initially, the country saw significant improvements in education and healthcare, earning international recognition. However, over time, economic growth slowed, and many sectors began to stagnate. Factors like limited access to global markets, the U.S. embargo, and centralized planning have all contributed to ongoing challenges. Today, while Cuba remains committed to its socialist ideals, it continues to search for ways to revitalize its economy and adapt to a changing world. When the Soviet Union collapsed in the early 1990s, Cuba suddenly lost its main economic lifeline. This era, known as the Special Period, plunged the island into a severe humanitarian crisis. Food and fuel became scarce, public transportation ground to a halt, and daily life was marked by blackouts and hardship. People had to get creative just to survive, relying on urban gardens and makeshift solutions. The Special Period remains a defining chapter in Cuba's recent history, illustrating how deeply the nation depended on Soviet support. Cuba has faced significant economic and social challenges over the years. Many families struggle with poverty, and shortages of basic goods like food and medicine are common. Despite some reforms, the government still maintains strong control over the economy, which limits private enterprise and foreign investment. These persistent controls make it difficult for the country to fully recover and improve living conditions for its people. As a result, daily life for many Cubans remains marked by uncertainty and hardship. Cuba's revolution was driven by a powerful vision for social change, aiming to create a more just and equal society. However, despite the energy and commitment of its leaders and citizens, the country faced stubborn economic challenges. International isolation, trade embargoes, and limited resources made it difficult to achieve the prosperity many had hoped for. Over time, these economic realities proved tough to overcome, showing that even the most passionate movements must grapple with practical constraints. The Cuban experience highlights how ideals and real-world economics often collide, shaping the course of history in unexpected ways. China underwent a major transformation when it moved away from strict Maoist socialism towards market-oriented reforms under the leadership of Deng Xiaoping. Instead of focusing solely on collective farming and state-run industries, Deng introduced policies that encouraged private enterprise and foreign investment. This shift wasn't just about economics. It changed the way people lived and worked across the country. The reforms helped China open up to the world, laying the foundation for the rapid growth and modernization we see today. China's remarkable economic rise began in the late 1970s, when the country shifted away from strict socialist planning and embraced market reforms. By allowing private businesses to grow and opening up to foreign investment, China unleashed a wave of innovation and productivity. These changes transformed the economy, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty and turning China into a global manufacturing powerhouse. The move away from centralized economic control proved to be a key factor in the nation's unprecedented prosperity. China's remarkable economic transformation really took off when the country shifted away from strict socialist planning and started embracing market mechanisms. By allowing supply and demand to play a bigger role, China opened the door to entrepreneurship, innovation, and foreign investment. This change didn't happen overnight, but it set the stage for decades of rapid growth and lifted millions out of poverty. The experience shows how adapting economic policies can make a huge difference in a country's development. North Korea and South Korea offer a fascinating example of how different economic systems can shape a country's destiny. Despite sharing the same history, culture, and geography, the two nations took dramatically different paths after their separation in the mid-20th century. North Korea adopted a centrally planned economy, while South Korea embraced a market-driven approach. Over the decades, these choices have led to striking differences in prosperity, innovation, and quality of life. This contrast makes the Korean Peninsula a unique case study for understanding the real-world impact of economic policies. After the Korean War, the peninsula was split into two very different economic systems. In the South, capitalism encouraged private enterprise, innovation, and international trade, which fueled rapid economic growth and transformed South Korea into a global tech and manufacturing powerhouse. Meanwhile, North Korea adopted a socialist model with centralized planning and limited market activity, resulting in chronic shortages and economic stagnation. These contrasting paths have led to a striking difference in living standards between the two countries. The story of the Koreas highlights how economic systems can shape the destiny of entire nations. In recent years, some Western economies have begun to show early signs of adopting socialist-inspired policies. These include increased government intervention, expanded social welfare programs, and more regulation in key industries. While these measures are often introduced to address inequality or market failures, they can also lead to unintended consequences, such as reduced economic efficiency or slower growth. Observers warn that if these trends continue unchecked, they could reshape the economic landscape in ways that may not always benefit everyone. It's a topic that sparks lively debate among economists and policymakers alike. France offers a compelling example when it comes to the challenges of state spending and economic sustainability. The country has long struggled with high levels of public expenditure, which puts pressure on its finances. Its pension system is often described as insolvent, raising concerns about whether future generations will receive the benefits they expect. On top of that, youth unemployment remains stubbornly high, signaling deeper issues in the labor market. Together, these factors serve as warning signs for other nations facing similar economic pressures. Margaret Thatcher famously remarked that the problem with socialism is that you eventually run out of other people's money. With this insight, she highlighted a key criticism of certain economic policies. When governments rely heavily on public spending funded by taxation, there's a limit to how much can be redistributed. Over time, if spending outpaces what's collected, financial resources can become strained. Thatcher's perspective invites us to consider the sustainability of economic models and the importance of balancing social support with fiscal responsibility. When we look at the history of socialist economies, a recurring pattern emerges. Despite different contexts and leaders, these systems often struggle to deliver long-term prosperity. The challenges aren't just about politics or management. They're deeply rooted in the structure of centralized planning. Without the price signals and competition found in market economies, it's tough to allocate resources efficiently. Over time, this leads to shortages, inefficiencies, and stagnation. It's a bit like trying to solve a complex puzzle without all the pieces, making lasting success incredibly difficult to achieve. When we look at socialist systems, one challenge often discussed is how incentives shape people's behavior. In theory, everyone is supposed to work for the common good. But in practice, if rewards aren't tied to individual effort, motivation can drop. People might do just enough to get by, since working harder doesn't necessarily lead to better outcomes for themselves. This isn't about people being lazy. It's a rational response to the way the system is set up. Over time, these small choices can add up, making it tough for socialist systems to achieve the productivity and innovation they aim for. Throughout history, one clear pattern stands out. Economies that uphold private property rights, pay attention to price signals, and create the right incentives tend to flourish. These principles help people invest, innovate, and trade more freely, which in turn drives growth and prosperity. When individuals feel secure in what they own and can respond to market changes, wealth creation becomes much more dynamic. This lesson has been repeated across different countries and eras, highlighting the importance of these economic foundations. Despite the hopeful ideals that socialism often promises, like equality and shared prosperity, history has shown a stark contrast between these visions and the real-world outcomes. Time and again, attempts to implement socialism have led to economic hardship, loss of freedoms, and widespread disappointment. Yet, the allure of a fairer system continues to attract new generations, perhaps because the promise is so compelling. It seems that humanity struggles to let go of dreams that sound good on paper, even when experience suggests otherwise. This ongoing cycle raises important questions about why we find it so difficult to learn from the past.